All right. So I will continue to let people in as we move forward. Hi, everyone. Tim Karachi here, representing Dr. Crowther, who unfortunately had to travel, so cannot be here today and sends his regrets for what we hope everyone will find a really inspiring discussion today. Today's chair's medical grand rounds. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Margo Mountjoy and Erin Skimson, who will be our presenters today. I'll give a very quick introduction. I think our guests, you may know some of our members already, but for those that don't know our guests, I'll give a quick intro. Dr. Mountjoy is a graduate of McMaster School of Medicine, also a PhD in sports medicine. And to some who may know her, she's a very decorated athlete in her own right, but practiced sport medicine for 30 years over at the University of Guelph. She works internationally for the Olympic Games, the International Olympic Committee, has worked with FIFA, World Rugby, International Golf Federation, and the World Anti-Doping Agency. And so she's got a very large, robust academic portfolio with a very large international research side to it all. And so Dr. Mountjoy is a clinical professor, Department of Family Medicine here at McMaster, and she's the regional associate dean over at the Waterloo Regional Campus for our School of Medicine. So thank you for joining us. Erin Skimson, she's the director of McCellerate, which is a very innovative operation over at Waterloo Regional Campus, MedTech and digital health accelerator. Erin has a background in product innovation, business leadership, technology transfer, and executive coaching. And she's vice president of product management at Trapeze Group and MyoVision. Led the tech transfer office over at the University of Guelph also, and has launched numerous medical devices with Stryker Canada. Erin started off with health promotion bachelor's degree over at Dalhousie University, and then went on to complete her MBA here at McMaster in the School of Business. So we're very excited today for our talk. I will hand over to our presenters who will talk about innovation by design, physician-led medical solutions through human-centered design thinking. So I hope everyone is ready for a very hopefully exciting talk. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Tim, for that kind introduction and warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here and spend some time with you and talk to you really about what the opportunities for you to get involved and what we're doing at WRC in our innovation space led by McCellerate. So I think, Erin, if you could advance the slide, please, for me. I'd like to just start off by saying our campus in Waterloo of McMaster is situated on the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinabe and Haudenosaunee peoples on the Haldeman Tract, Six Nations that includes Tenka on the other side of the Grand River. This is opposed to the Hamilton, which is the Two-Row Wampum Agreement. We're in a different territory of Waterloo Regional Campus. Next slide, please. So what is McCellerate? Our tagline, MedTech Innovation, Powered by Collaboration. Just to start off with, we have no conflicts of interest to declare. Next slide, please. And just briefly about myself, because Tim's already introduced me, so you can scroll through this. I'm at McMaster, Guelph. Those are some of my sport organizations and the people that I work with or have worked for. Next slide, please. Erin, I think you also been introduced, so we don't need to review this slide as well, because we already know about you. I'll just briefly go over the objectives of what McCellerate is before handing over to Erin to tell you how and what. So our objectives of McCellerate is really about medtech innovation, but it's that opportunity for everyone to have the chance to innovate in medicine. Explore what our role is in this. Well, this is for the talk today. Introduce some frameworks for medtech innovation, and then invite you to become participants. I think this is where I hand over to you, Erin, to talk about each of these objectives and what we're going to cover today. Right?
Thank you, Margo. Much appreciated. So
All
these are we're going to talk through the agenda items here. And I think we're going to start talking about why does innovation matter? Why does MedTech innovation matter? And particularly now, why does it matter? So
all
I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this. This is Donato Credi's beautiful representation of Alexander cutting the Gordian knot. And the Gordian knot it's an ancient legend from Phrygia, which is modern day Turkey, in the city of Gordium. And King Gordius dedicated his cart to the gods, and he tied it to a post with a knot that was really impossible to untie. Centuries later, Alexander the Great arrived in Gordium and faced with the challenge of untying the knot. And this was prophetically, this was who was going to determine the next ruler of Asia. He pulled out his sword and sliced through the knot. And he said, it makes no difference how it's undone. This bold act symbolized creative problem solving and decisive leadership. So the phrase now cutting the Gordian knot refers to solving complex or intractable problems in bold or unconventional means. And we might say that today we've got some Gordian knots in our own healthcare system. I think I don't open the paper or turn on the radio without hearing about many of the challenges that we're all facing. These are from Kai Hein's literature, saying these are the key critical areas that Canada is focused on. But I would say on top of that, we're also hearing about physician burnout and the need for technology and the economic situation in healthcare. And so we've got this Gordian knot, but also have really interesting and additional pressures on top of our system. So, what I would purport is that really it's only us who can change the system. And it's about individuals changing behaviors, changing the way they do things. And that is what is going to lead to systemic change. So only if we do things differently, but also can we do different things? So let's explore a little bit about that. So when you talk about innovation and maybe doing things differently or doing different things, this really starts with the problem. And I'd say one of the things I get to talk to dozens and dozens of medtech companies and startups. And often when they come, they talk about, I'll say, what's the problem that you want to solve? Well, I'm going to fix healthcare. It's phenomenal. I love the enthusiasm and the spirit, but what the heck does that mean? And so the importance of understanding, how do you define a problem? How do you figure out what specifically is the thing that you want to do? And without that specific, it's really difficult to know what you're tackling. I love Einstein. There's a quote attributed to him to say, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. And I will share in my experience of building products or building new innovations, the more specific and clear that we were about the problem we were trying to solve, the more success we had. And so you look at the iceberg model, and we're going to visit this a little bit from a systems perspective, but often what we see are events or behaviors, and our response is, well, we need to fix the behavior, or we need to fix an event that's occurring. And so but that's what we can see. But, I call this like the secret life of any organization is really what's below the surface. And it's the thing that's controlling most of what's going on. But unfortunately, it's pretty difficult to identify if you don't take the time and think about what is the problem that underlies that. So if I scratch the surface underneath a behavior or an event that's happened, often there are patterns, or there might be policies in place that say, well, people feel constrained, or I've been accustomed to doing that. Why do we do it? Because we've always done it that way. And that's, in fact, something that I've heard in medicine when I've spoken to physicians who are doing advisory, and innovators ask, well, why do we do this way? Why is this the practice? Well, we've just always done it that way. Interesting. So why have we always done it that way? Well, if you look at some of the structures, it may be because there's an ethical reason that something's done. It may be that the considerations of regulatory affairs legally, we're comfortable with this. It's within a parameter that we understand and we're good with. And then you under that to the mental models. And this is really, where it gets to, I'm going to challenge each of you to think today about what are your mental models that keep you doing things in a consistent way, even if you see something that could be done differently, an improvement that might be made, a comment that you say consistently, I wish this was different. I wish I could do this better. Wouldn't it be great if we could, you fill in the blank. And yet we often pull back as humans to say, well, I'm comfortable in this space. I don't want to rock the boat. It's going to make others uncomfortable. It's going to be difficult. And so when you look at the confluence of, from our base mental models as individuals through to collective events or behaviors that happen, it's a pretty tough thing to actually identify what is the problem that we're getting at. I want to use this as an example to show you how an interesting problem was identified. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Christopher Charles. And Dr. Charles was a graduate of the WRC in class of 2016. And he developed an incredible innovation. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about it. But I have a fun tie back to this also. I worked on some of the IP at University of Guelph. There's a link between the campuses, but this is a very impressive doctorate who in his early years discovered something really interesting. So let's have a look at this. Sorry.
I'm not hearing the sound, Erin. I don't know if others are.
Okay. Dang. Does anybody? I apologize. I'm going to be asking for tech help in the middle of this. I apologize. I'm going to pop out for 2 seconds to see if I can understand. Oh, you know what? Give me a minute. Okay. I'm going to try this now.
Teams may need access to sound.
Yeah.
On the computer.
Let's see. Sorry. One more. Sorry, one more time. I apologize. Can you hear now?
Not
No.
yet.
First moved to Cambodia, I lived in a rural village, and it took a little bit of time before people got used to this sort of foreigner wandering around. Initially, I was here to search for a remedy to a problem. Anemia,
Can't
caused
see it.
by a lack of iron in the blood. It causes dizziness and weakness. It breeds complacency and lethargy. Kids can't concentrate in school. It also causes premature births and problems during pregnancy. For
I
women.
apologize. One last time.
Nearly 2 out of when I first moved.
Okay. We're going to try one more time here. Thanks for your patience.
I first moved to Cambodia, I lived in a rural village, and it took a little bit of time before people got used to this sort of foreigner wandering around. Initially, I was here to search for a remedy to a problem. Anemia, caused by a lack of iron in the blood. It causes dizziness and weakness. It breeds complacency and lethargy. Kids can't concentrate in school. It also causes premature births and problems during pregnancy for women. Nearly 2 out of 3 children are anemic. But this piece of metal has the power to stop it all. My challenge was to find a way to supplement the typical Cambodian diet of fish and rice. I knew that iron pills and other iron treatments weren't really affordable by many people in the villages. In my search, I found that cooking in a cast iron pot can release iron into the food, and that iron is then absorbed in the diet. But I realized that most Cambodian women use aluminum pots because they're cheaper and lighter. And then I got to thinking, what if I could get them to put this chunk of iron in their pot? It would be a simple, cheap, and accessible treatment that even the remote villagers could use. But my simple solution had one big problem. I found that the women were hesitant to add this sort of ugly piece of iron into their pots Then that I found that the iron blocks came in very useful, but just not in the pots.
All,
And so I realized I had to dig a little bit deeper. I searched for everything. I looked at sayings and beliefs. I looked at rituals and anything that would give me a better understanding of Cambodian culture. And then I landed this, the symbol of good luck.
all, 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 all.
I think I was a little bit shocked when I found out how positive the findings were.
All, all.
In the test areas, anemia has pretty much disappeared altogether, which is absolutely astounding. It was far exceeded what we had expected. We're hoping that this little fish holds the key to treating anemia across the region and beyond. It's definitely one lucky fish. Yeah.
All.
I just want to check everybody could hear that. That was okay.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, it's interesting when you think about innovation and MedTech innovation in particular. Often my first thought is some fantastic AI-powered robotic, new way of cutting people open. And we are going to look at that a little bit later on. But I think, one of the things to appreciate is that innovation, there's a large scale of innovation. And when we talk about either doing things differently or doing different things, doing things differently is, it's as simple as how do we look creatively at the world around us and say, maybe there's an existing solution that just hasn't found the right problem yet. I really appreciate for what Chris did is he dug deep enough to say, hey, I think I have the solution, but now I have to make sure, is it actually going to fit within the systems or the paradigms or the culture and the mental models to make this successful, which he did. And you can go to, I'll share a copy of the presentation after, and there are links to all of these innovations. You can buy these now, either, as gifts for people or for yourself. And I see that folks in Canada are now using them, which is really exciting. So wonderfully, you start to identify the problem. So as a physician, what might be your role in particular, if you think about physician-led innovation? So I think I want to start, this is a busy slide, I apologize, but I wanted to share, what does it mean to bring an innovation to market? And we're going to look at some models in a minute, but it's a long and arduous process. The MedTech path to commercialization is particularly fraught and difficult. I say to folks all the time, you've chosen to be on this bus, and I really admire that because it is a hard bus to be on, but very, very worthwhile. Clearly, you just look at, if you could eradicate anemia in an area, that is something. The adage is it takes 5 years and $50 million to bring medical technology to market. And I'd say, in my experience, that is well within the realm of what's reasonable and common. But there are a number of sources of stages. And really the first place where you start is thinking about what is the unmet clinical need? And are you actually solving a problem that needs to be solved? Do you have a solution that is going to be both affordable and profitable for a company to stay in place? So as clinicians, you have a front row seat. You are practicing at the front line every single day. And it's, again, I'm going to ask you that question of, how many times a day do you say, oh, that's a drag, or I wish this was different, or what if? Each of those to me are unmet needs or opportunities that you understand innately. When enough folks are saying that, you begin to see what is called not just a single customer impact or pain point, but a market pain point. And that is really, those are the sweet spots to be focusing on. You have to have a big enough market to bother spending 5 years and $50 million to address a problem. And let me be clear, not all of them, the ironfish didn't take that long, but it did take a number of years, and it took a good amount of research and investment. But I paint this out because I say that there's, at the very beginning, this is the shallow end, deep end that McMaster talks about a lot. There's a very shallow end of even just identifying, hey, what are the challenges that you face on a daily basis? Maybe chatting with some companies. If you think about the problem discovery, what are those critical first steps? You've got these unique clinical insights. We do sometimes what's called a reverse pitch, where we have, as opposed to companies who are pitching the solutions they have, we have physicians who will talk about what are the problems that you wish you could solve on a daily basis. And that is often a spark of innovation, potentially for either some engineers, or it could be for entrepreneurs or others who want to be involved or maybe partner on creating a solution. Also, this framing of the real challenge. And, this, one of the things I've noted is we do work with a number of physician entrepreneurs or advisors. And the assumptions that are made by those that do not work in the medtech industry are that, I've got a point solution and it's going to change the world. The framing of the real challenge, I find, a good amount of the feedback that physicians provide is, let me tell you about how the system actually works. And your point solution may be really, really novel if there were no other considerations, but within the context of the spaghetti of dependencies and layers of bureaucracy or, downstream care that needs to be provided, this isn't something that's feasible or viable. And I think, the needs finding, we're going to talk about the importance of empathy and that human-centered focus. And, one of the common innovation failures at this early stage is solving the wrong problem. And I think this is where physicians have, and clinicians in general, but physicians in particular, have an incredible opportunity to, one, help companies fail fast, is what we call it, or determine that, hey, if I moved the needle by like 3%, then actually I'm going to be hitting the target. But if I keep going where I'm going, I'm going to be 25% off by the time we get to market. The next area is, so let's say we've discovered a really interesting problem and we know that it's validated. Then you get into the solution design. And none of this is done by any one person. The importance of that, of a multidisciplinary team coming together. And, as physicians, you work in multidisciplinary teams all the time. You have this opportunity to work together. The opportunity to prototype. And this may be, literally it's with string and Lego figures to start. And then you begin to build something that, is this going to work? Let's do a workflow by role playing. These are, the kinds of fun that you can actually have as you're prototyping and designing. But the co-design becomes really important because you need somebody there who's going to say, I like this idea, but it's actually going to cost too much. So I'm going to play the role of the financial manager. And then maybe you need an engineer in the room to say, I like what we're trying to do, but actually we don't have a material on earth that can do that right now. Maybe you need somebody who's going to look at the IP and say, yeah, you know what, there's already prior art, so nobody's ever going to protect this. It will never get to market. But an opportunity for you to be an advisor, a consultant, or even part of, thinking through the application is critical at this time and provides an enormous amount of benefit for companies, again, to not get too far down the wrong road. And so, the challenge here is, are we building clinically usable and patient-centered solutions? I can't tell you the number of, when I worked at Stryker, the number of products we launched, and I'd look and think, holy Hannah, I don't know who we didn't talk to, because now we've got physicians using, small women who are in doing surgery using these massive clamps that were built for men who are 6'7". It doesn't work well. And so, that practical feedback is really important. And then the last is pilot and trials. And one of the biggest barriers in medtech is the regulatory side of things. And so the importance of validation and research. You're at Hamilton Health Sciences. This is one of the preeminent research institutes and medical research institutes in the world. What an opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit later. There's some really interesting funding opportunities locally to work with companies to do some of the scaling, the innovation, piloting, and iterative feedback.
All.
So how do you go about this? One of the things that I find interesting is as in your education as clinicians, you learn to be really good clinicians, and you learn to use empirical models, and you learn to look at the literature and what does the data say. And there's not a lot of encouragement, I think, to color outside the lines. And yet what we're asking here is, hey, can you color outside the lines? So, there's sort of a natural tension between being an innovator without a lot of guidelines. This is not something, you're not taught innovation or entrepreneurship or commercialization skills in medical school right now. There aren't necessarily opportunities within your broader career to dive into how do I do this without maybe going to do an MBA. That's a big commitment when you've already got a very, very full-time job. So I want to just present some of the systems. These are systems that have been developed at MIT. Stanford has done a lot of this work with what's called D School, or the design school. Thinking about, what are the skill sets? What are the mindset that you need to bring for really for successful innovation? So what I'm showing you here on the right-hand side is called a human-centered design or design system, and it sort of combines two frameworks. One is human-centered design, and the other is design thinking. And they really get to the heart of this is about putting the human at the center. Interestingly, though, there are lots of humans at the center. And so, you've got the patient is primarily the focus that we look at when we're talking about healthcare. How do we make sure the patient experience is good and that the outcomes are good? But we know we've got in the quintuple aim, we also have to be thinking about caregivers. Is your wellness okay? Is it affordable? Is this something that there's going to be a return on investment, or at least there's going to be a reduction in cost? Is it equitable? Sustainability is something to think about. So it's, when you think about human-centered framework, often you think, as long as it's okay for the patient, it'll be good to go. That's not necessarily the case. Part of this is doing good stakeholder mapping and making sure that you're inviting the right people, the right parties, the right voices to the table. And, I think this is to Dr. Mountjoy's credit that Accelerate really came out of a vision and a view of there are a number of MedTech companies, in particular in the Waterloo area, which is it's very innovative, but very technologically innovative. And the innovations we're seeing don't necessarily include the physician voice. And I'd say we're seeing a good number of technologies that get far along, but have not included the clinical voice or the patient voice at the table. And this is the opportunity, this is the vision that Dr. Mountjoy saw, was to bring an organization to the table that could merge and bridge the expertise that you bring from the bedside and years of practice, along with the potential of technology. And so, when you think about if there's a planning and an information gathering phase, this is really when empathy comes in. And, it's not a word I think that is used, maybe it's used in medicine, but it's not something that was used in business primarily. But when we really thought about, can we get to what is the pain point underlying what it is that we're trying to solve for each of those stakeholders? If you can identify that, you can really come up with a pretty good product in the end. But you have to engage and empathize. You've got to connect with users at the other end to understand and even put yourself in the shoes of what are the pain points that they're experiencing. I had a very powerful experience when I was managing for a transportation company. We were trying to build an app for a paratransit application so one of the things we were trying to do was to ensure that the application worked for folks who were sight impaired. Well, we got on the phone with a woman who was a user who was sight impaired, and she had never downloaded anything on the iPhone. And so we went through the application of downloading even just the Zoom application. And that it was such an emotional experience. She was emotional about saying, I didn't think I would ever be able to do this. You've opened up a whole new world for me. And by the time we got to analyzing our app, which was terrible, by the way, we had not done a good job considering, but what a learning experience that was to say, wow, had we not included that feedback, that really key, and actually observed it, we would not have had the opportunity to think about, we've got to redesign this from the bottom up. And so, not having, for instance, the clinician voice at the table when we're designing products is a massive challenge, and inevitably, I think, does not lead to good outcomes. So you need that time of engaging and empathizing. It's the information gathering. And then there's got to be a time to synthesize those learnings. And this is really when you do what's called sense making. And you're trying to understand, what have I heard about? What's the problem I'm trying to solve? And let's really get clear about that problem. And now we can start to generate ideas about solutions. So, that's where this is the 55 minutes of spending more of our time at the front end to ensure that we're really getting clear about the problem we're solving, and then starting to generate ideas. Because if we're clear about that problem, it doesn't take long actually to find good solutions. The prototyping and testing is, again, we've talked about, we need to have users' engagement and feedback. We then implement and scale. And the first few customers, or the first few times that you implement something, frankly, it's not likely to go really well. And that in medicine is, that's not part of how you approach medicine. The do no harm does not include, let's try it and see if it works. However, we're going to look a little bit later at a technology or a solution that actually did that. So the question I have, for you to be considering today is, how might you be able to say, hey, we need to prototype, we need to iterate. What needs to be true in terms of protecting our patients, ourselves, the do no harm oath, to try something new, to color outside the lines a little bit, but in a way that's responsible, that meets our ethical responsibilities, as well as our regulatory responsibilities, our financial, legal responsibilities. These are the parameters, you need to put those in place and make sure that everybody on the team is comfortable and is willing to push the boundary, but with what's plan B or what's plan C, especially if you're pushing into boundaries, that really could have consequences. It's interesting in other areas I've worked in, I've said to folks, like, nothing that we do is going to kill anybody, but this is a different, in your case, there's a far greater risk that you're taking on, which is again, part of the 5 years and expense of bringing MedTech to market. And so getting comfortable in discomfort is one of the things that I would challenge you to think about. How do you do that? What are you willing to not tolerate anymore? And so stand in discomfort to learn about it, or push a boundary. And in fact, ultimately to improve healthcare and delivery. And so, the initial, it's also getting comfortable saying, hey, that didn't work. That's not a failure. What have we learned from this? So we can go back, and you see this as a circle. There's no straight line process. Counter to typically engineering is a very clear workflow. We're going to do if then, we do A, then B, then C. That's not what we're talking about here. This is constantly learning, constantly iterating. When I managed product teams in technology, the board of directors would often say, Erin, when is this going to be done? And I'd say, it's never done. That's the frustration, but also the beauty and the enticement and excitement of innovation is there's always a way to push it further. There's always a way to improve on where we're at. So, this is the additional complexity, and we've already seen this this iceberg model. But on top of having to think about, managing all of the pieces in the design thinking process that we've just talked about, now you've got to think about, okay, I also have to think about all the other structures and all the other systems that we have to integrate into. And there's a wonderful practice called you ask why 5 times or 7 times. And the point is, the curiosity that you bring, as opposed to being defensive, and there's often a very defensive first response. If you say, hey, let's try something new, it can be a little terrifying. But what if you can tap into curiosity to say, well, why would we do something differently? Or how might we do it differently? And you keep, it's like you scratch that surface down to the core of getting back to what is the ultimate problem that we're trying to solve, but also can we start to address, the systemic things, the patterns in the workplace, the behaviors, but also those mental assumptions, and recognizing, hey, when we invite people to the table, we have to recognize they're going to have their own sense of concern or their own sense of defensiveness. And so how are we addressing those in a gentle and curious way to maybe help us get out of our own way through innovation? I'm going to show that one example. This is Dr. Joanne Ho and Sophia Benjamin. And Joanne Ho did her training in Toronto. And one of the things she observed, she's a geriatrician, and in her observations, she saw that there were a number of doctors in a multidisciplinary team for older adults were prescribing all sorts of medication. And seniors would get to a point with the multi-pharmaceuticals, they were maybe at a point of risk, but there was no way to vet, how do we know that these elders are okay? And so when she came, Joanne now works within WRC, and she and Sophia Benjamin said, what if we could get together a multidisciplinary team and think about, if we had somebody who was in a geriatric psychologist, as well as geriatrician, as well as a pharmacist who could be ready, kind of like the poison control for elder care. And so they've developed GeriMedRisk, which is now widely available. And so, this is a behavioral thing, or it's a resource for physicians or for families to call if they think, hey, my mom or dad or an elder in my life is acting strangely with this new medication. They've got a place to go and actually think about what considerations do we need to have, but they've got access to experts to do this. And, that's an innovation, taking an existing system like poison control and applying that to say, we can do that now and use the same system in other ways. A brilliant way to be solving problems with access to good resources.
All
So I want to spend a few minutes talking about just showing some examples of some physician-led innovations. These are, I find these incredibly inspiring. I coach a running group, and last night my question to the group was, tell me about something that's inspired you lately. And I was talking about one of these innovations. So the first thing I want you to think about, in your involvement or interest in whether it's MedTech innovation, or it could be in commercialization, it could be in entrepreneurship, what are the internal and external drivers? What is it that is motivating you to think about wanting to be involved? So certainly the external drivers, primarily here I've listed the quintuple aim, and in fact, the sextuple aim with sustainability added in. But also, what are those internal drivers? And what I'm going to ask you to think about that as you listen and look at each of the stories that I'm going to share, and think about, I was really trying to think about what are the characteristics, what are the passions that came to the table when I reviewed each of these stories. And what I see is, what is the purpose and passion? What is the thing that makes your toes curl or gets you excited? Do you think, if I could solve that problem, like that would be really meaningful and important to me? And that values-based approach to any problem is important, primarily because it's going to take a long time and it's really hard. And so to have that like fundamental values-based attachment to something, actually, it gives you the energy you need when things get tough. When I worked in Guelph, we'd have professors come through the door, and we'd often say, I wonder, do they want to be rich or do they want to be famous? And those were sort of, those internal drivers of, sometimes it's about reputational. And they would come in and say, I don't really care about my IP. I don't really care about that protection. I just want to be able to publish, and I want to be able to go talk about what I'm doing. We might talk through, hey, some of the ways to actually build that reputation or that fame is actually by protecting your intellectual property, and actually by commercializing, because you're going to have more opportunities to actually apply or for this to be successful. So, for example, we used to, we would say, if you had a new molecule that you think might be valuable in the pharmaceutical industry, if there's not good IP protection around it, the pharmaceutical industry will not touch it. It's $500 million to bring a drug to market. So, when I talk about $50 million, that's for med device. But if you think about pharmacology, it's more like $500 million. If that's not protected by IP, and there's not an opportunity for the pharmaceutical company to have some time to recoup that investment in the market, it's not going to be something that's, so the reputational piece could be there, but you lose that opportunity by not thinking about good protection of your IP. Sometimes it's about boredom or risk tolerance. I've had very interesting discussions with some folks who have been with some physicians who have been in practice for maybe 15 years. And they've come to see me to say, I'm interested in MedTech innovation. How can I get involved? And we've talked about different ways. And they've said, I've learned how to be a clinician, and I'm a great clinician. I want more. I'm ready to spread my wings. I want to learn some new skills. But, in medicine, in medical school, I learned how to be a good clinician, and that's what I've been practicing. But how do I now expand? The beautiful thing is, as a MedTech advisor, we can learn these skills together. Part of what we do at McCellerate is to offer some opportunities for some light training or some, connecting with. It could be that you're going to be mentored by an existing clinician who's doing some advisory. So, this is a chance for, say, maybe you spread your wings. And I've had some physicians even come in and say, I have a bit of imposter syndrome because I want to do this, but I don't really know if I have the skills. And what I've said is, the beautiful thing is you're coming to the table with the skills that are needed, which is that medical side, and that curiosity about what are the other context pieces I need to know about. So how do I learn about what a TRL is, which is a technology readiness level? How do I understand about funding? What do I need to know about the regulatory system, so that if I'm advising, I'm thinking about this from maybe it's a market perspective. But those are skills that can be learned, and we've got lots of resources to steer you down that direction. So if this is about, I'm ready to spread my wings, sometimes it's about risk tolerance. I've one of my very good friends is the director of surgery at St. Joe's in Toronto, and she and I have this back and forth where I'll say to her, Marianne, something I really admire about your job is you take on a case and you do the analysis, you then do the surgery, there's a success, and then you're done. It's like you actually do something that is tangibly finished. And she'll say, but Erin, what I like about what you do is there's great creativity in it. You get to do new things every day. And so, we have interesting discussions about the opportunities. And sometimes it is about either risk tolerance or being able to say, I want to spread my wings in a different direction. Maybe you've come across a problem and you say, I have to solve this. This is something that the vision or your opportunity for leadership is burning. And it's truly like you're going to make your mark in the world. And by bringing that vision to people and pulling together a team to help you solve that problem, you're going to leave your mark. What's the legacy that you want? Maybe it's about more control and freedom in life. Maybe you want to be rich, and that's okay too. That's, in fact, there should be a little bit of that drive, because that's an important outcome if you're going to be particularly commercializing or working in entrepreneurship. So I'm going to ask you to think about what are your internal drivers, and just identify what are the drivers that you see in the stories that we're going to cover. So this is Dr. Tim Laswell, and he was a graduate at WRC in 2022. And he's one of the co-founders of a company called Cobionics. And this was a robot called Cody. And the very first application for Cody was natalless injection, intramuscular injection. And you can see at the top, that's Dr. Laswell. And this was clearly during the pandemic, and they were looking to develop a needleless injection. So it's a fantastic baseline opportunity. What they recognized is, yeah, that's important, but this is not a big enough problem. There's not a big enough market for us to actually build an entire company on this. And so skip forward to 2023, and Cody has now evolved into an AI-powered telerobotic. So in particular, for ultrasound, they've got all sorts of different attachments that can go onto Cody's arm, and this can be done remotely. So you're dealing there. Some of the problems they were trying to solve, one is workforce injury, in fact, for clinicians who are having to do, repetitive motion and having some injuries, sort of shoulder, wrist, elbow, but also to be able to offer good ultrasound opportunities in remote communities. And so you can see that there's an imaging tool there. In 2024, this was presented to our then Prime Minister. And so, this evolution, what I see is Dr. Laswell, he was very driven and really willing to work hard. And there's no question, any entrepreneur that I've met is incredibly hardworking. In fact, I attended a few weeks ago a talk that was given by a couple of physician entrepreneurs. And one of the questions was, what do you wish you'd known at the beginning that you knew now? And both of them said, if I'd known what I know now, I probably wouldn't have done it. I mean, they said that kind of jokingly, but I think it takes a toll. And so, that commitment to, can you be an entrepreneur and can you be a physician or a resident or a medical student at the same time? It's not for everybody, and that's okay. But if you've got that spark and it is something that captures your attention or your imagination, certainly there are paths into this. This is Dr. Mehran Anvari, and he's been around Hamilton a long time. So I have a bit of a personal connection. In 2003, when you're looking at the telerobotic surgery in North Bay, I actually worked for Stryker at that time and helped to secure that equipment. Craig McKenzie is the doctor that we worked with in North Bay. And I got to attend some of these very early surgeries. You can see the second photo, Dr. Anvari standing behind a Stryker tower. And I had just had the pleasure of introducing the first high definition camera system into Canada. So, this was Stryker that was actually doing the medical innovation, but Dr. Anvari has really pushed boundaries in terms of the application of robotic surgery in new environments. So again, I'm going to show a quick video. At that time, we were working with NASA and with the Canadian Space Agency. There was an interest in saying, hey, if we're going to have space travel that is, going to Mars, which could be a 3-year trip, what happens if you end up with somebody who's got a gallbladder attack on board and we need to do a cholecystectomy? And how, you don't have, the astronauts are not necessarily trained surgeons. Could we do this remotely? What are some of the challenges, or what are some of the opportunities? So I'm going to let Dr. Anvari talk about that.
12 years ago, I performed a series of remote telerobotic surgery operating on patients in a remote city in northern Canada as a means of demonstrating that using robotics and telecommunication, you can provide surgical care to patients from a distance. It was a series of quite complex operations on the stomach and the colon and spleen. During some of the first series of surgeries, we had representatives from the NASA and Kennedy Space Agency who, after observing a couple of the surgeries, put a challenge to me. Can you do this in such a remote location when there are no other, it's not a hospital in there? And they offered the Aquarius for a series of NEMO missions, which was an underwater habitat, very, very similar to the International Space Station, where many of the astronauts, including Katie Coleman, who had flown in space, were being trained for the next series of trips up to the space station. And we did a series of experiments to see how far can we stretch the limit of telesurgery. And we recognized beyond a certain point of time delay, as you would experience with International Space Station, a moon base, or a Mars mission, you are going to require some degree of automation and autonomy. And out of those experiments, develop a series of plans for developing robotic systems for medical care, which can incorporate some of that automation and autonomy. We've been working with the same company which has made all the Canadarm and the arms, the robotic arms currently on the space station, the Dexter. And so many of the engineering and the software which had gone into developing those arms for NASA was what was used to develop a series of robots which can use imaging modalities to perform various surgical tasks in an automated fashion.
So it's really revolutionized the medical industry.
It can. And in fact, the next stage would be to give it autonomy. And that would really revolutionize. But I don't think at the moment that our regulatory sort of bodies are yet ready for that. But definitely automation, which is what its capabilities are. But really the robot is designed to be able to also perform potentially autonomous acts, to make some decisions, as so the space robotics can already do. So I think it's the next phase of the evolution. From IGAR, it can be adapted to a number of.
So I'm going to stop. Yeah. So what's interesting is that was from 2003. That video was 9 years ago. So that was around 2015 that video was taken. So, I want you to consider the tenacity, the resilience, the dedication that it takes to have that vision of, hey, we've got the technology that actually can work. But I loved Dr. Anvari's response when the announcer asked, so really you're revolutionizing the medical industry. He said, well, it can. But there are a number of reasons, and a lot of time that it's going to take to be, for this to be able to be actually working. And in fact, he referred to IGAR, which is, it's the image-guided automated robot for breast surgery. And it's looking at being able to access using a robotic arm to do a breast biopsy for less pain, for better appearance, and it's more accurate and can actually ablate the if you come across a tumor or some cells. So that was not approved by FDA until 2023. So we're 20 years on. And so, in fact, the International Space Station Research and Development Award was given to Dr. Anvari, and I quote, he said, this is really an award, a recognition of 20 plus years of work by a number of people. It took engineers and technicians and doctors and astronauts, and frankly, a number of companies and consortiums that have come together to help develop this technology. So that collaboration, I see his experience. His experience in doing, starting with, we were doing porcine labs remotely to start with. And that's, that was one of my first exposures ever to HHS, was in the porcine lab and getting to use this equipment. And partnering with, for instance, at Western, they had a robot that nobody else had called Da Vinci, and being able to do some remote surgeries. So, the planning, the time, the dedication this has taken is really something else. Now, Insight Medbotics is a company that's been developed and come out of this research, and they're the ones who are responsible for commercializing IGAR. But it gives you an example of, this is when I talked earlier about when I imagined MedTech from the beginning, which is about, cutting people open remotely or from space, I had a really interesting exposure to that early on. But I look and think, man, this was in 2003. It was the beginning of an early stage of my career. And here we are 20 some years later, and it's just getting to market. This is Dr. Mohammed Al-Arakia. He is the digital health lead at WRC, but also CEO of eHealth Center of Excellence, and he's a local family doctor. And he's a lovely man, and that's not true of all entrepreneurs, so that's notable. Dr. Al-Arakia is an incredible visionary, and he's worked with government. He really understands from a systems perspective. He's thinking very clearly about how do we bring systems together to enable digital health to be introduced. And some of the things we talked about earlier on, when you're a physician who's done really good clinical training, you graduate from medical school and suddenly you're starting your own business, you're being asked more and more to implement technologies that have all sorts of implications, from a cost perspective, from an integration perspective, from a data privacy, data security perspective. And what Dr. Al-Arakia noted is, how do we set up a system that we can support physicians in adopting technologies and not just leave them on their own, so that we actually do get technology adoption. And as opposed to the burden of technology, which I'd say, the promise of technology is what medicine's been looking to, but it's become more of a burden. And I think it's why we're seeing some of certainly the burnout. So the leadership that Dr. Al-Arakia has shown, but also he is an exceptional communicator who again and again shares his vision to draw people in to want to work with him. And so, if you're considering adopting technology, I would refer you to the eHealth Center of Excellence and have a conversation with Dr. Al-Arakia's team. So this is a little, it's going off in a very different direction from an innovation perspective. This is a breast in a boat, and this is Dr. Don McKenzie, who's in BC, and he had a very interesting experience. He's a physical medicine specialist, and he had a woman come to see him years ago in the 90s, actually, and she had a sore shoulder, and so he said, okay, well, here are the exercises I'm going to prescribe, so you need to do those, and your shoulder will get better. And she said, well, I can't, because I'm a breast cancer survivor, and the guidelines say that I shouldn't be doing repetitive movement with my arm, so I can't do that. And he did a little more research and said, I really think it's important that you do these exercises for your shoulder. And she's saying, you're not hearing me. I've had this breast cancer surgery. I can't. And so he said, would you be willing to do these? I'll observe, but would you be willing to try this with me? And so, yeah, she was willing to try. The challenge is, at that time, the guidelines said, if you are going to do repetitive movement, you're going to end up with edema and further complication potentially. So this gal did the exercises, and in fact, her shoulder got better. And at that time, he said, I question these guidelines. I'm not sure that they actually are serving, that they're serving our community. So he went to a group of women who are breast cancer survivors. And, clearly, if you're saying you can't do any repetitive movement, he's a paddler, which is why I've chosen this picture, but it means you can't rake leaves. It means you can't really carry heavy groceries. You can't paddle. You couldn't canoe. So he went to this group and said, would you be willing to do this? Would you be willing to go out, color outside the lines with me and be in a dragon boat race? And so I want to play a video of that.
Now, World Dragon Boat Championships in Wellington this weekend. So what's been going on the waterfront in Wellington? And among the boat, they're called, the qualification championships in Wellington this weekend. So what's been going on the waterfront in Wellington? And among the teams, a group of women from Canada, a breast in a boat, they're called. The qualification for joining their team is suffering and surviving breast cancer. And on Monday, the team capsized out the harbour. Well, Jackie Mount spoke to them as in trepidation. They tried again.
We are all in the same boat, 24 middle-aged women, all breast cancer survivors, all committed to battling 40-knot New Zealand winds in their first dragon boat race abroad. We were really nervous and apprehensive, and we did it. We're so thrilled. We're quite prepared to take a chance to join this program and test whether or not it really was true that repetitive upper-body exercise produced lymphedema. None of us have had lymphedema whatsoever. One of them leaned over to me and said, in Maori,
and we would call you Rahina Toa. And it was like, oh, what does that mean? And she said, strong and mighty women.
Others have applauded their openness.
She said, oh, we're just 10 years behind in terms of that, and we really, and it's just, we're not allowed to talk about these things, and so they were just so grateful that we had come to spend a couple of weeks with them,
Paddling for those women. The races in Wellington were held in mid-February, and despite huge swells and a few frightening dumpings, the team finished third in their first race.
Some women said that they were as terrified doing this as when they were diagnosed with cancer. We all looked at each other, and a few people said the same thing. Even before starting the first race, we've accomplished it. We've come one breath.
Okay. I mean, that to me, I spent yesterday when I found that video, I had a few tears. You think about Dr. McKenzie, there was a comment I read in, or a presentation he was giving. He said, I had a number of people question this project and say, are you sure you want to do this? And that's as a physician who's responsible ultimately for the well-being and the outcomes, to have that kind of question. And he had the courage and was able to be uncomfortable. He was unafraid. He challenged that status quo, but there's a lot of discomfort in that. And what I admire about that is he was willing to stand in that discomfort for a bigger purpose, for something that he truly believed he could make a difference. And I mean, that video to me is a testament to a massive difference in people's lives. So if this is something you're interested in, how do you begin to get involved? So there's a really strong ecosystem at McMaster. If you go to McMaster/entrepreneurship, there's a great page that takes you to a number of these. There's actually a full entrepreneurship listing about the ecosystem, but I just wanted to provide some context about the kinds of support that's available if you're interested in an entrepreneurial journey. And again, this could be, shallow end from saying, hey, I'm interested in learning about some startups, or maybe being an advisor, through to I have an idea and I think I actually want to work with a team for commercialization, or I want to be the entrepreneur and go start a company. So there are some great entrepreneurial education programs that kind of take you through what are the steps and what do you need to know and how would you go about that. And the clinic is one which is located in the basement of the Health Sciences Library. The Forge is at McMaster Innovation Park, and they've got particular programs that are fantastic introductions to, or a little bit further along in the innovation journey. There are great entrepreneurship events, and the Office of the Vice President and Leila Soleimani has been running the entrepreneurship at MAC. She's done a spectacular job of bringing together folks from across campus, from a number of different departments, to work together. And there are great opportunities for profs in terms of taking some time off to go work on a particular, it's a competitive process, but to go work on an innovation for a period of time. It might be about startup and IP support. It's quite expensive, as we've talked about, but there are some excellent programs through Ontario, through Canada, and even locally to support that. And if you need to learn about IP, intellectual property protection, McMaster's Industry Liaison Office will actually take care of a lot of that and walk you through the steps. So you've got those supports. Startup Accelerator, so Accelerate falls in this category. So we work a lot between startups that come and say, hey, I need a particular, piece of advice. I need some research. And Graham Campbell and I work closely together, and Graham's very familiar with the research enterprise at MAC. We spend a lot of time triaging incoming companies to make sure that what we will say is physicians are very busy and their time is extremely valuable. So you've got to have a very clear question to go to a physician to know that it's going to be of value to you as a company, but also that there's going to be value that the physician is able to render in a short period of time. And so, we're there to support that with the goal of helping companies be successful or decide, hey, this isn't right. There are funding opportunities. Again, clearly we've talked about that. And then many community partners that come together. And it's interesting to be in the Waterloo region, which is a very renowned area in terms of tech innovation. And there's been quite an emergence of healthcare innovations, I'd say, since the pandemic in particular. And how lucky are we to have a community that is so technologically and entrepreneurially advanced right next to a community that has a renowned health and medical education and research center. And so, the bridging that we're seeing between the two communities is spectacular. We ran the first health innovation boot camp in conjunction with the clinic last fall. And then at the Synapse Pitch competition, which is in Hamilton this year, the second place prize was Select Laboratories, and they were one of the folks that came through our innovation boot camp and are now they're getting ready to do some research with Dr. Leonardi's lab at McMaster. And so, this is a community effort, and we are all part of the same community. So, here are some challenges or some opportunities or questions, asks I have of you. One, gift us your problems. If you have a persistent problem or a challenge that you think deserves to be or could be addressed, I would love to hear about it. And I would love to connect that with entrepreneurs who might be working in that area. If you have a particular interest in solving that problem, it's likely or it's possible that we're already working with a company that's looking in that area and could use your expertise. Engage your colleagues. These are interesting discussions to say, if you see something that might be done differently, how might we? It's a very powerful question. How might we do this differently? Not that you're challenging folks to do it differently, but even that consideration can open up incredible doors. Do you have some small, persistent, issues or niggles that could be solved? That's innovation. It doesn't have to be, taking robotics to the moon. It truly is changing the way potentially that, people access healthcare or access a form or access a sheet or make your life a bit easier or their life easier. There are boot camps you can attend. You can collaborate as startup advisors, get involved in MedTech pilots. I've got a number of companies. We're working with a number of companies who are looking for support from the clinical community right now. So if you've got an interest, please reach out. And our information is here. My information is here as well. Our website is there. There's an intake form that you're welcome to fill out. And I received that. And it just gives me a bit of information about you, your background, your interest. And often then we can schedule an intake call. And that gives me an idea of, how can I connect your expertise or your interests with folks that we're working with in the community. So with that, I'm wondering if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was wonderful. I know we're getting close to time, so if people have questions, we'd love to take one or two, if possible. And please take down the email and contact information of Erin and Dr. Mountjoy, because if you certainly have questions or want to get in touch, they're available. Maybe I'll just kind of quickly say I'm really impressed with the amount of opportunity that exists through this venture. I think that there are many our clinicians are really in an optimal position to identify a lot of problems and the needs that can be met. So I'd encourage people to take advantage of this opportunity. I think physicians are often in a really good position to help solve these problems. I think the challenge we have a lot of times is being able to accept failure as a learning opportunity. Every single entrepreneur has had failures, and I think the opportunity to learn fast, fail fast means learning fast. As I've been told by others, and you get your learning points, and you know what to do differently the next time, each and every opportunity. So it's but I really like your concept of that shallow end for seeing problems every day and taking advantage of that. Dr. Mountjoy, any comments that you want to make? I don't see any questions in the chat.
No, just to say thank you for your time and attention. I'm looking forward to solving some of our healthcare problems with you in the future.
All right. Well, I want to thank our presenters once again, Erin Skimson and Dr. Mountjoy. This has been an awesome presentation. Something that's very different than what we're accustomed to learning about, but likely as or more important than most things we do. And it's those questions that keep us up at night that might have solutions if we put our mind to it, and meet the right people. So perhaps I'll make an ask, which is when there are some of those networking opportunities that our faculty could be available to. I think there's a lot of people I think would really enjoy stepping into this unfamiliar territory and meeting some interesting people that might pull them in when needed. So that might be a good step as well.
Fantastic. I will make sure to share this with you, Tim, and with Mark, and distribute any opportunities that are coming up, because we would welcome that support. And I know we've got companies lined up that would be very, very appreciative of this support. So thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to have this opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both again. Thank you all for attending, and hope everyone has a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.